And thanks for staying up late with us as we dive into all things people, power, and politics. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Ruparaj. You know, it's a war of words between President Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. And a reality check on a claim about Social Security benefits being floated by Trump and Elon Musk. All of that is coming up. And a Detroit businessman living on the streets to experience what people without a home go through every day, what he saw and what he lived during his time on the streets, both during this experiment and also in real life when he had to do that himself. It's an important conversation and one that we'll continue to have here on The Pulse about homelessness and unhoused people in our great community. And one of the president's most controversial moves, doing away with DEI, and several businesses are now following suit. We're talking with a PR guru you know well about how organizations have to handle this tough topic, as well as the battle between the president and a major news organization, the Associated Press. What will be the fallout of all of this? Well, we begin with a war overseas, not just the battle between Russia and Ukraine, but the war of words between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Zelensky. The president referring to Zelensky as a dictator at one point, as well as claiming Ukraine shouldn't have started the war with Russia, even though it was Russia that crossed the border and invaded Ukraine. That led to Trump making this claim about Zelensky's approval ratings, and Zelensky then firing back.
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens.
Unfortunately, President Trump, with great respect for him as a leader of the people, which we respect very much, the American people who constantly support us, unfortunately lives in this disinformation space.
Now, according to the Kyiv International Institution of Sociology, Zelensky has about a 57% trust rating, which the report describes as a fairly high level of public trust. We've said it before, keeping up with this political news cycle has been a little bit draining. It's like drinking from a fire hose every single day. So let's fly through some of our big stories, some of our top stories tonight, beginning tonight with foreign policy, where the president's designated 8 Latin American cartels as foreign terror organizations. They argue their connections to drug trafficking, migrant smuggling, and violent ways of extending their territory warrant that. But it's unusual because, you see, the designation's normally used for groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, which use violence for political reasons. Critics worry it could harm trade with Latin America. Now, back here at home, a new executive order by the president pushing to give him more control of some independent regulators. We're talking agencies like the Federal Trade Commission, Federal Communications Commission, and Securities and Exchange Commission. This is all part of a bigger push, you see, for Trump to have more authority over the government and possibly limit spending of congressionally appropriated and approved money. Past administrations have wanted these agencies free of daily politics, but the Trump White House says their independence could undermine his agenda. The president also continuing his war with one of the world's biggest media organizations, the Associated Press. He said the AP's access to the White House at this hour is restricted until they go along with the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico. You may remember Trump renamed it the Gulf of America, but the AP said it would keep calling it the Gulf of Mexico, so the name is recognizable around the world. Fox 2 is also referring to it, by the way, as the Gulf of Mexico, following AP guidance. By the way, we did a segment about how the process works for changing the name of the Gulf. And if you want to watch that, just scan that QR code at the bottom right of your screen. It's an interesting process and one that isn't purely political. Pretty interesting. Well, to Arizona now, and another mid-air disaster to tell you about. 2 people are dead after 2 planes crashed mid-air this morning just northwest of Tucson. We can also tell you right now and report at this hour 2 people were also in there that were not seriously hurt. Obviously very early in the investigation, but what we know is one of the planes was able to land safely while the other hit the ground near a runway and then caught fire. We've seen a number of airline disasters this year, and this one comes just days after a plane flipped on the runway in Toronto. We spoke with aviation expert Daniel Morton after that crash, who says despite the number of incidents this year, he says it is still safe to fly.
Don't be afraid to fly. It's perfectly safe. And these are just weird things. If it was something consistent, you know, the same type of airplane, like the Max situation, or a same type of ATC situation, but none of them are related to each other in any way that I can tell. There's not a training lack of training. There's not just bad equipment. I mean, yes, they're going to go in and update the whole system, which they really absolutely need to do desperately. Should have done years ago. And that's one great thing that does come out of this. In fact, one thing that comes out of every incident, we make changes. The aviation industry always changes based on that to prevent that same incident from happening again.
All of that as a union and former workers warn some of the 400 FAA staffers that were laid off had direct safety rules. That's despite President Trump saying no one with a critical safety position was fired. Now, the group said that some of the workers supported both safety inspectors and airport operations. This comes as a new AP NORC poll shows confidence in air travel has fallen since the deadly mid-air collision between an Army helicopter and American Airlines flight last month. And while not all of you share that view, many are more apprehensive about flying, and you told me that on social media. Now, here are some of the people told me. Sonia says 4 plane crashes in 3 weeks is more than a little concerning. Jennifer said, I've lost interest in flying. I'm already a nervous person, flyer. Jackie chimed in, hey, definitely more nervous than ever before and due to fly next month. Safe travels, Jackie. It's going to be okay. Arthur says, yes, I think I'll drive or stay home. Probably the safest place to be. Again, to reiterate, experts do believe air travel is still safe, saying they don't believe any of these incidents are related relative to the causation of the disasters. Let's take you to Mar-a-Lago at this hour. President Donald Trump speaking to the media. Now, we told you about the executive orders he signed off on when it comes to IVF and transparency last night on The Pulse. But he also made a claim about Social Security that's getting a lot of buzz on social media. And it isn't quite right. So first, here's what the president said.
We have millions and millions of people over 100 years old. Everybody knows that's not so. We have a very corrupt country, and it's a sad thing to say, but we're figuring it out. Now, the good thing about Social Security and what I read is if you take all of those numbers off, because they're obviously fraudulent or incompetent, but if you take all of those millions of people off Social Security, all of a sudden we have a very powerful Social Security.
Now, these are statements Elon Musk has echoed in his role as head of DOGE. And when a politician or a public figure, left or right, says something that isn't quite true, the Fox 2 reality check comes in and corrects the record. Simply put, those numbers are overstated. Now, this is a bit complicated, so stay with me here. We're going to take you by the numbers. According to a report from last July by the Social Security Inspector General, between 2015 and 2022, the agency paid out nearly $8.6 trillion in benefits. Now, there was nearly $72 billion worth of improper payments during that very time frame. While that seems like a huge number, like a big number, it's actually less than 1% of those payments. And most of that was overpayments to living people, not people who are dead. On top of that, early last month, the Treasury reclaimed $31 million in federal payments that went to dead people. That was a variety of federal payments, not just Social Security. That was actually part of a pilot program where Congress let the Treasury into the Social Security Administration's so-called full death master file. A former Treasury official says that's just the tip of the iceberg, and the department believes it'll recover $215 million with its access period running through the year 2026. So now you might be wondering, how the heck did this happen? What happened here? Well, part of it has to do with the software having a lack of date type. What does that mean? Well, it means some entries with a missing or incomplete birth date default to more than 150 years ago. On top of that, several reports from the Inspector General say the agency doesn't have a new system to actually mark the death information, which includes, by the way, roughly 19 million people born in 1920 or earlier who haven't been marked as dead. That does, though, not mean that the people were getting benefits. Now, the reason they haven't updated the database, it would actually cost $9 million or more. In fact, a 2023 report says almost none of number holders mentioned in those reports are actually getting payments. None. And the agency automatically stops payments to people older than 115 years old. Now, we say it all the time. This show does not protect politicians. We protect facts. It's our job as journalists to correct the record if there's misinformation being spread and holding everybody accountable. You'll remember when then President Biden was in office and said nobody under his watch had died in military duty. He was wrong. We pointed that out. Kamala Harris made false claims about abortion and what the Trump campaign would do. We pointed that out. And as this president is in office, he's not a king. He's a public servant. And when he says something that's not right, we will correct that, as well as Democratic congressional leaders as well. And if something that you see that you're not sure about, hey, you want to fact check, hit us up. You can send an email to our email box here, thepulse@fox.com, or scan that QR code to auto-launch the email on your phone. You can also reach out on social media as well. Well, he's a businessman and activist who took time to experience something no one should have to go through, homelessness. We're talking with Mario Kelly about what he lived through and his message as we see the problem of unhoused folks in our community continue to grow. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics, here to talk about a reality that far too many people face, homelessness. Detroit businessman and activist Mario Kelly is with us here tonight, and we thank you for joining us. He has a great book that he put out called The $27 Millionaire. He started a company with $27. He was actually unhoused himself, and ended up becoming running a multi-million-dollar company, all because of what you wanted in your life, which was a change. And so many people out there want that kind of a trajectory, but they find themselves in a situation like we saw with that mother and her 2 children. And those 2 children died in a van in the Greektown parking garage. We understand, as we get to the question here, that right now in the Detroit public school system, it's estimated close to 5,000 students are unhoused, according to the McGregor Fund. 5,000. That number probably doesn't surprise you, as you've been keeping close tabs on this problem.
Yes. Actually, that was part of the reason that I did the went homeless for 48 hours, just to bring awareness to youth homelessness. When I did the Hotels for Homeless with New Era Detroit, and I seen so many kids coming in that was homeless, I didn't believe it. So that was the reason I went down there, to bring awareness to the whole situation.
Let's talk about that for a moment. You did this, and we're looking at video of it right now. You went, and this is something, you were unhoused for a little while in your life before your success story here. You went back on the streets recently, and this is video of you on the streets. You decided to show people what it was like. Give people the stuff they don't realize that happens to people who are unhoused when they're out on the streets.
The domestic violence towards homelessness, like I said, the youth homelessness, and then just people just walking past you like you don't even exist. You know, out there asking for change or money or whatever may help that person at that particular time. Most people walk right past them.
When you found yourself in this situation earlier in your life, when you were unhoused, what led you to that situation?
Honestly, it was financially, lost my job, got divorced, and the only thing I can do was just stay in my van.
And so you lived in your van. So when you heard that story about the mother and her 2 children that were in the van, I'm sure your heart must have broken for them. How often do you think that's happening across our region?
I'm pretty sure that's happening on a daily basis. There's no shelters. The shelters that we do have, they're unsafe, they're not clean. We have programs like Wayne Metro or CAM that I called on a regular basis that they told me they were either full or to call back. So that's happening on a daily basis here in the city of Detroit.
And I want to point out that there are safe places for people to go to as well. I know you're saying that your experience was like that, but we know that there are places. If someone right now is watching this and they need a place to go, there are shelters. We don't want anyone freezing out in the cold. But you're saying we can do better as a society. What do you think needs to happen in order to fix this? And I mean, I don't want to just say throw money at it and make it a legislative issue with politics, but do you think from a city, state, and federal level, more can be done, and what do you think that is?
Affordable housing. I feel like there's a lot of abandoned buildings, there's a lot of abandoned houses in the city of Detroit. We need funding from the federal, state, and local level to be able to get some of this affordable housing. I remember they had something called the CVI bill where they use local groups to help the violence, and the violence has went down 25% in those areas. Why can't we do that for our homelessness? Allocate funds for those local businesses to help the homeless people in their area.
And you've done so much to bring awareness, not only the book talking about your own success story, but living out there again after experiencing being homeless. And you work with people like Hill Harper, who you are familiar with as an actor and also a person who ran for office as well, and also Shar Yates, two people who have very strong opinions about the unhoused issue in Metro Detroit. Take a listen.
When Mario reached out to me and we talked about, in this case, it was an apartment complex where folks were living on the east side, and had me come out. We walked into an apartment where the walls were covered in black mold. The kids were having to sleep on filthy stuffed animals, and I asked, there are no mattresses. The door was half broken, and walking into the kitchen, turn on the faucet, no water. The fire was burning on the stove, and I said, ma'am, you can't leave the fire on. She said, baby, if we turn it out, it'll never come back on, and we need it. This is the way people are living across our city, across our state, and across our country.
No matter where we are, no matter what circumstances we are, it might seem like it's a beautiful place, but there might be something underlying that's very bad that's going on. So when you're in that beautiful restaurant in Greektown, think about the person that might be out front panhandling, or the beggar, or the person that you see downtown that's asking for money or help or whatnot. Just because your circumstance at this particular time might be a very good circumstance, we never know. None of us do. He who giveth can taketh away.
That's by the grace of God that we're sitting here today with a roof over our heads. Yes. And it is so safe to say that with one paycheck gone, how many of all of us would be suffering? Yes. And that's something that you've experienced. Talk about red tape, Mario. Anytime you try to start a program or do something, there's a lot of red tape. How does that stop people from getting help, would you say?
Honestly, there's so much paperwork to fill out with even getting in these groups like CAM that it scares you away. A lot of these homeless people don't have IDs or addresses, and those are some of the requirements to even get into these locations. Must have an ID or different things like that. So there's a lot of red tape that makes me feel like they do this on purpose.
One of our friends and stagehands here at Fox 2, who we affectionately call Z, had told me recently, he's like, it's interesting because you put that phone number up, but the people who are sitting on the streets aren't watching television, nor do they have a phone. Talk about the disconnect there. We're putting numbers up for people who may be in a shelter, but the majority of people who are unhoused aren't in front of a television. A majority of them don't even have a cell phone to even watch any of this on their phone. So there must be another way to get the information to the people. And then you're also saying that a lot of the shelters that were downtown have been pushed out to 7 Mile or Deep West. They don't even have money to get on the bus to get to the transportation to get to these places. So there's so much red tape put in front of the people that it makes me feel like this is something that they're trying to do on purpose. We have to do better. We absolutely have to do better. And we're going to continue, by the way, on this program to talk about this, because this is not a white, black, brown, young, old issue. This is all of our issue, because how we treat people who have nothing is the measure of our society. But I want to thank you for what you do. Mario Kelly, you're an inspiration, the $27 millionaire. What a good book, and we're going to continue to talk to you to try to get some more answers. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Well, some controversial changes, and now a question of messaging. The Trump administration wants a lot of the DEI programs gone. Up next, how a PR guru says businesses should handle if they decide to follow suit. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show, The Pulse. Joining us now to talk about how organizations should handle the Trump administration's push against DEI from a messaging standpoint, public relations guru Matt Friedman with Tanner Friedman. And it's always good to see you, Matt. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
You too, Roop. Happy to be here.
So let's talk about this. This is interesting because you have this administration, whether you agree with President Trump's stance or not, it certainly has an effect and a ripple effect, not just with the federal workers and federal DEI programs, because that's what the president president has power over, but it has an effect on corporations, doesn't it?
It does, and they're trying to cast as wide of a net as they can. Anybody who has any contact with the federal government now is being contacted by the federal government. So I'm talking about media companies. They're in the target. Anybody that receives any federal funding, or really anybody that the government is interested in, is basically on watch. And what they're trying to do now is thread a needle when it comes to communication. 5 years ago, when DEI became popular, and it was quite popular after the murder of George Floyd, companies said, we need to do something to be more inclusive, to have more diversity. What do we do? And they came up with these programs. Some have been successful, some need some reevaluation. But when DEI was popular, what I said to clients is nobody's ever gone out of business listening to their customers and listening to their employees.
Sure.
We have another layer now on top of that called the federal government. And it's making it very tough for communication because this has become so politicized over the last year or two.
And as you say, over the last 5 years, because it was after George Floyd that then President Biden implemented a series of federal programs to try to up the DEI efforts within the federal government. And that's what this president is now saying, hey, we got to roll that back a bit.
And it's extending to companies like Comcast, which is regulated by the FCC because it owns broadcast TV stations and a broadcast network. But the FCC has never gotten involved in these kinds of things before. Disney is concerned about this too and is making some changes. And you're seeing it up and down sectors because there's nervousness there. And how it's being communicated is being received well by some, not well by others. They're boycotts one way, they're boycotts another way, and it's all because of politics and which team certain audiences think that they're on. And the real shame of this, and I've heard this from some clients, is there's some programs that are really effective in giving more employees within a company at different levels more of a voice on decision making in the company, and that's at risk now too. It's not just hiring.
Let's talk about the other companies that don't have necessarily ties to the government, although the federal government does have more of its tentacles in our business world than we realize. Target, Amazon, Google, they're also rolling back their DEI programs, and they've announced that as late as this week. Why?
They perceive that either they're going to come next somehow with federal government action, or the tide is shifting in public opinion, or both. I think it's a gamble no matter what, but that's a gamble that they're making that they think is in the best interest of their shareholders. And communicating that to their customers so they don't lose business in the process is really tricky.
When you talk about 70 million plus people who voted for President Donald Trump, that's 70 million potential customers who believe the things that this president does. And those are things that these companies are aware of. I wanted to, we only have a quick 90 seconds left here. The Associated Press right now up against an uphill battle against this White House. The White House basically saying, hey, you got to call this the Gulf of America, not the Gulf of Mexico, and until you do, you're not allowed in the Oval Office or Air Force One to cover the news. They're still allowed in the press briefings, by the way. Your thoughts on the uphill battle, because this isn't about your opinion about what's happened here, but rather how they handle this crisis.
The AP is so unknown to the average American news consumer and is so important to the newsroom we're sitting down the hall from right now and almost every newsroom in the country. And this is an opportunity for the AP and its members, like Fox 2, to explain the AP's value to the American news consumer. So I think that's one thing they should be doing. But we need to get used to this. This is going to happen repeatedly because of the stance this administration is taking toward the media. So get used to it, and news consumers need to really start exploring where they get their news and where it comes from, and a lot of it comes from the AP.
And the AP has what they call the style book, and that style book essentially has the rules of how to write. And if you follow PR as well. So if you follow AP style, you follow whether or not you say Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, how you reference President Trump at second reference. These are all rules within the AP style book. It's such an interesting topic. We have to go, but I do want to say we invite you back to kind of share your perspective more with some of these really interesting and deep dive topics. Good to see you, Matt Friedman.
You too. Happy to come back. This is not going away.
It certainly is not, and we'll need you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That is the Pulse for tonight. Extra is next. I'm Ruth Farage. As usual, we'll see you tomorrow night. Have a good one, everybody.